quite frankly, you have to have a vision of what is your retirement? What is the exit? What's on the other side?
Welcome to the Veterinary Blueprint podcast, brought to you by Butler Vet Insurance, hosted by Bill Butler. The Veterinary Blueprint podcast is for veterinarians and practice managers who are looking to learn about working on their practice instead of in their practice. Each episode, we will bring you successful, proven blueprints from others both inside and outside the veterinary industry. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome to this episode of the Veterinary Blueprints podcast. I'm your host, Bill Butler, and today we're joined by Travis York from 3-in-1 Veterinary Advisors. Travis grew up in the veterinary world, working in his father's animal hospital in Iowa. He later got a degree in accounting and worked for a number of lenders over the course of his past 20-year career. He's had experience and helped more than 500 veterinary practices with acquisition, expansion, and exit strategies. He's a certified exit planning advisor, and Travis is going to bring a wealth of knowledge today, navigating the complexities of selling or acquiring a veterinary practice, or just thinking about exit strategies in general. So let's get started, and we're going to welcome Travis to the podcast. Welcome, Travis.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and dive into some of these fun topics.
Absolutely. So we were just chatting before hopping on, as we generally do. So for those people listening, all of our listeners, we always have the pre-call call. You know, we have a list of questions, but I think just diving in to start, Travis, why don't you give the listeners a little background? You know, I gave the 50,000 foot view. What have you been up to in the last, decade or so, working with veterinary practices and helping them with your expertise?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been a very fun, fun and exciting time in veterinary medicine over the last 10 years. We've been learning a lot. I kind of over that 10-year period was a part of Live Oak Bank. So got to experience, the use of SBA lending, a lot of construction financing, in that realm, worked with a lot of hospital owners who were 2.5, 3 doctor hospitals, had started 5 to 7 years ago and expanding into a 5,000, 7,000 square foot freestanding building. Also over the last 10 years, spent some time with a company called Calico, which is now inside of Suveto. So got, a real taste of some creative acquisition structures, including, some subordinate debt that was maybe a little bit more stretched. We, worked with seller notes. We utilized some retained ownership in some of those strategies. Spent a very short time also working alongside of the team that built Suveto. So got a little bit of a firsthand seat at some corporate acquisition world, and then over the last 2.5 years, been working with some of my clients on just thinking about exit and best business practices and quite frankly just what are the nuances, and like any entrepreneur trying to figure out where's their opportunity and inefficiencies in this evolving space.
I'm glad you bring that up. So, as we chatted about right before this, we said, well, we got some questions, but we'll just kind of let the conversation float where it goes to, because you have your own podcast. Just plug your own podcast right now, and then we'll mention it at the end. So you have your own podcast as well.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. So I host a podcast with a good friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of James Yost. That podcast really came out of connecting with James, who works with a company called Signature FD. Signature FD focuses on wealth advisory for veterinarians. And as a lot of veterinarians were, obtaining kind of generational type of wealth, their needs were different. And so the podcast really launched there out of, hey, how do we help veterinarians who are experiencing life-changing liquidity events have the right knowledge base to A, obtain those if they're interested in them, and then B, if they do obtain that, how do you be prepared for it, and not kind of be one of those stories of, hey, this generation got generational wealth, and because we didn't put the right systems and processes in place, the next generation is back
we gave
to shirtless.
60%, we gave 60% away to the federal government. And now that money's gone into, two generations, or a generation's gone. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the foundation of that podcast. It's evolved a little bit, over time. I'm sure you experience this with your podcast. You're always trying to find new and interesting topics, right? You can't go find that horse and just keep beating the same thing. But so we've brought in some new topics, but that's a lot of it is kind of, how do we think about some of these things that are new to veterinary medicine, and how do we think about creating some of the best business practices to obtain the value that's aligned with you.
So I just, in my own world, we talked about similarities and dissimilarities between the insurance industry and veterinary industry. And I think, as we mentioned before we got on the call here on the podcast, business principles are business principles. I have a P&L. A shoe store has a P&L, a restaurant has a P&L, a veterinary practice has a P&L, and it's going to have things on it like payroll and cost of goods. Now, I don't have a cost of goods because what I'm selling is an intangible product. But, I think at the end of the day, for veterinarians, I think, we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about figuring out, the exit strategy planning, that you've got a certification in that and background in that. And I went through this at my own practice, my own agency, planning for the future, right? So I'm under the age of 50, but I know at some point I'm not going to sell insurance until I'm dead.
Yeah,
At
I mean,
some
look,
point,
father time is undefeated, right?
yeah,
No matter how good Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide are, Father Time is more undefeated than Nick Saban.
he's gonna win. He's gonna hold the trophy up. And so I purchased another insurance agency, and that was a 70-year-old gentleman that hadn't done a lot of preparation. I won't go into a lot of detail on it, but it got to a point where he had to make a decision, and there was no preparation. Didn't have a P&L, didn't have some of these things in place. And so I think when you're a small business owner, and correct me if I'm wrong from your own experience, Travis, you get to a point one day, if you haven't prepared and said, okay, I'm done, I want to cash out. And if you haven't done the prep, you've now discounted your business or practice if you're a veterinarian, right?
I absolutely, right. Like I think back to the story my dad tells about the first time he had the opportunity to buy a veterinary hospital, right? And this was in Wisconsin in the late 70s. And really, the way the profession traded didn't require prep work for my dad, who's a baby boomer's generation, to buy kind of that silent generation, right? The guy came in one day and said, "Hey, I'm ready to retire." And my dad said, "Well, okay, I'm very interested in buying your hospital. Can I get your tax returns?" Well, no, you can't, right? You can either, here's my number, I'll finance it. I'll get a life insurance policy on me to protect my family, and you can buy it or not. But we're not going to get into the financials. And that's really the way a lot of veterinary hospitals trade. And you didn't have to do prep work, right? We've also kind of gone through a period where consolidators were coming in, and if you were a 3+ doctor hospital, didn't require prep work because the valuations that they were paying relative to your expectations were significantly higher. And so you achieved success without prep. But we're really in a new environment where that prep work is critical, right? You have to have the business in place, right? You need to understand operationally the business is set up. You've invested in the right equipment. The facility is up to date so that it's attractive, so that a young doctor would want to buy that facility.
I don't want to buy all your old equipment.
Right. Now, and what you can't do is a year before you get ready to sell your hospital, go put new equipment in it. So you need to be continuously planning and thinking about that. You need to continuously be building systems, because today's doctor doesn't want to have to be the one doing reminders, paperwork on Saturday.
They don't want to have to build the innovation into your business that you ran for 35 years.
Absolutely. So you got to think about that. You have to, quite frankly, you have to have a vision of what is your retirement? What is the exit? What's on the other side? I mean, I have a lot of colleagues who they exited for incredible multiples, but they had no vision of what they were going to do. And they're almost like, like a car stuck in the mud at this point in time, just kind of spinning their wheels with a big pile of cash in their checking account, but not really a vision of how to use that and how to make that matter. And so that personal vision is huge. And then connecting that personal vision to where most of these entrepreneurs are going to get their retirement funded is out of their business. And so we've got to make sure that
I
the
mean, that's me,
operation.
right? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so I did a fair market valuation to say, okay, I mean, I'm nowhere close to retiring or selling my agency or, I mean, because the venture capital money also plays in the insurance world, I get offers all the time. And I always say 35 times EBITDA when I'm on the phone with them, and they laugh at me. I said, well, I'm not selling today. I'm selling, 15 years down the road. So I have to future value this thing. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I was like, well, then I'm not for sale.
right. Well,
And, but
that's the truth.
But as a business owner, I have to think about, okay, where am I going to be? Where's the ball going to be? Or Gordie Howe, I'm a big hockey fan. Where's the puck going to? You have to skate to where the puck's going to be. And so for a small business owner who has a lot of skin in the game, you think, a lot of times you're not paying yourself because you're putting money into the business on that future investment. The investment is not your 401k. The investment is the asset that you're going to sell off one day, either internally to an internal sale or external to an external sale, whether that's a third party associate who's going to come in, or corporate. I mean, because the corporate world and the insurance thing is the same. And so, okay, I'm a minimum of 10 years out. So I have a 3-year, like, okay, here's my benchmark. Here's what I need to do for the next 3 years. Here's what I need to do for next 5. And then 5 years out, do another fair market valuation and say, okay, what's the next 10 to get me to retirement? And one thing that I was told by the firm that I had do my fair market valuation was 3 years prior to your exit, pull out everything you pay yourself as an owner to put it into the bottom line and show it as revenue instead of business travel, car expense, meals, education, all the fluff that business owners, and I know veterinarians are in the same boat. You use your business as a lifestyle. If you're a small business owner, there's a lot of tax advantage. Pull all that out 3 years prior so it shows up as income to help you not have to say, well, I pay myself a lot of money and here's all the 50 different ways. What do you think about that kind of that thought process for exit planning?
No, I don't. I mean, I would take it even a step further, right? And
Great.
again,
Yeah.
we're in a very transitional period in the veterinary space. I think in the veterinary space, and I don't have any depth of knowledge in again, business principles are the same, but I don't have a depth of knowledge in the insurance space. But in the veterinary space, we've come out of an environment where it was a seller's market. And you could get a lot of people to lean into projected and adjustments, and the market was so aggressive that you could get those accepted, right? What we're seeing now is kind of that black and white EBITDA number is the black and white EBITDA number that people are willing to look at. And these are even corporate buyers, right? So you have to have clean financials. Now, is it, 2 years, 18 months? Again, Bill, I think that all depends, beauty's in the eye of the beholder on that. But the other area that I see is I had a lot of people who they were off on margin, right? They're like, they just hadn't tightened up some of their business operations, right? They always knew it, fully acknowledged, I run this a little bit loose. I just don't want to put in the extra effort to drive 3 or 4%. So they made a decision in 2021 that, hey, I'm going to tighten the ship. I'm going to get that 12 clean months, not anything to do with personal or any of that, but like maybe even personal, you can make an argument. And all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, I'm going to tighten it up so I can go sell at 18 times EBITDA and with a 3% higher margin on a $4 million hospital. And that matters, right? And now all of a sudden that 4-doctor hospital is not selling for 18 times EBITDA. It's selling for 9 to 10 times EBITDA.
So for our listeners out there, what is EBITDA?
EBITDA would be earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. I always like to think of it kind of in simple terms, is it's like the discretionary cash flow that's available to you as the owner, right? If you own the business, what are you going to be able to get out of it?
Yeah. In the insurance world, it's always, they used to say, well, premium, I sold for X times premium, 2.5 times premium or 2.5 times revenue or whatever that number is. But insurance agencies want to talk about premium versus revenue. So I've got a $10 million book of business. Well, your $10 million book of business may only revenue $50,000. I've got a $5 million book of business that revenues $250,000. And so it's where the profit comes in. And that's that EBITDA number is really the bottom line number as you mentioned, discretionary number at the end. So when we say EBITDA for our listeners, it's really the true measurement of profitability at your business, right?
Right.
Would you
It's
agree?
basically, it's your revenue less everything it costs to run the business, right? Paying for all your cost of goods sold, paying for your staff, paying for your doctors, paying yourself a reasonable wage as a doctor, right? If you don't pay yourself as a doctor and you go to sell your hospital, we're going to back out something for you to be paid as a doctor. Your rent, and then all of kind of those other ancillary costs. They're all backed out. And then what's left is what you have as a business owner.
And then that's the number multiple. So whether that's 18 or 9, it can make a huge difference, because that's where that generational wealth you're talking about, right? So you spend 25, 35 years running your practice. And when you say, okay, I'm done, you want to be prepared. So, I think you talked about spectrum of ownership as one of the things that maybe we want to cover today. And what, for, if I'm a veterinarian and I come to Travis and say, hey, I'm interested in engaging your services, you're going to talk to me about spectrum of ownership, whether I'm an associate or I own the practice. What does that mean to you?
Well, I like always kind of my first question when you talk about spectrum of ownership. So Bill, I'll just kind of ask you a simple question. If you own 100 shares of Coca-Cola, are you an owner of Coca-Cola?
Technically, yes, but not really.
Okay, so what you have is you have economic ownership,
Okay.
right? Like that. And so always my first question on spectrum of ownership is when you talk about ownership, what is it that you want? And you answer that question very much like an entrepreneur, right? Because entrepreneurial ownership is the choice and the opportunity to have the buck stops here. All of the decisions are mine, right? Historically, in veterinary medicine, ownership has always been attached to only and exclusively entrepreneurial ownership, right? We say, hey, I'm an owner in this hospital. That means you're a decision maker.
Yep.
To your point, technically, if I own 100 shares of Coca-Cola, I am an economic owner in Coca-Cola. And I always want to understand from my clients, what is the objective of ownership, right? Because if I own 1,000,000 shares of Coca-Cola, I'm going to do pretty well economically. But even if I own 1,000,000 shares of Coca-Cola, and it's
They're
funny,
not going to give you they're not going to give you the secret formula. You don't get the
no,
combination to go.
I, I always used to joke, and when I was doing some kind of talking with vet schools and some of the veterinary students, I'm like, if I owned 1,000,000 shares of Coke, I'm not calling the CEO of Coke and saying, hey guys, we need to go make, coffee flavored Coca-Cola. And now all of a sudden they have coffee flavored Coca-Cola. So, but like the CEO's not taking my call. He's laughing me out of the room, right? And so as we've seen veterinary medicine evolve, we're seeing more opportunities for minority ownership. We're seeing more opportunities for profit interests. We're seeing more interests like, just different structures in ownership where you may not be an entrepreneurial owner. Does that mean it's a bad? I'm not going to say it's a bad thing or a good thing. I want to help people understand what are your goals from ownership. Or if you're an owner of a hospital, if you're giving a doctor ownership or having them buy ownership, what are your goals and what are their goals? Because if your goals are to retain them or to compensate them better economically, and you don't want them to be an entrepreneurial owner, then I wouldn't be getting them in as a minority owner, because they're only going to be disappointed. And then you have a financial marriage that you've got to break up. And I'm sure as an insurance person, you've dealt with some of those.
Well, and there's a whole host of ways to you can do deferred compensation plans. Say, hey, I want to give you a slice of pie that's bigger than everyone else here, and some sort of unqualified plan that you get a little bit more than everyone else because I want to keep you around for 10 plus years. There's different ways to do that than giving up a stake in your business.
Absolutely. Right. And if you have somebody who is entrepreneurially driven and you talk with them and they want entrepreneurial ownership, they're never going to be happy as a 15% shareholder of your business.
They see themselves in your chair someday.
Right. They want your chair, right? And so then you've just given them that. Now, I'm not saying it's not a way to sit down where you can win and they can win and you guys can all come together. Like I'm a big believer that, if you have those open dialogues, you set appropriate expectations, you can find a way. And quite frankly, the pie in veterinary medicine is big enough that it can go around. It's just you can't be too greedy on how much pie you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating an exit plan. I mean, I think there's a lot of conversation around that right now in the industry as a whole. And I'm not going to pretend to understand all the nuances, but just, in from where I sit, in my chair and in networking, there is a lot of conversation about the consolidation within the veterinary industry and exit planning strategy. And I think it weighs heavily on some owners where they look at that generational wealth. And it's hard to say, I don't want generational wealth. But in some respects, and this is my own personal opinion with my own business, if I want generational wealth and I want to perpetuate that internally, it's up to me to build the model versus just say, okay, I'm done one day. Hey, guy working for me or woman working for me at the agency, buy me out. But I didn't put a mechanism in there for them to buy me out at the level that I
Absolutely.
want, right? So talking about planning and creating exit strategy and how that works in the veterinary world. I mean, what are one or two key things that an owner should be thinking about when they, number one, when, and number two, what are a couple things they should be doing?
Well, like I'm a big believer in that statement. You got to begin with the end in mind, right?
Yep. What
So
does
like
done look like?
I think day one you buy a business, day two you should be building your exit plan. Now that exit plan is going to change because in case you didn't know it, as an entrepreneur, the minute you should never start a business without a business plan, but the minute you finish your business plan, it's garbage.
Correct.
Right. So again, you should not enter ownership without an end game in mind, knowing full good and well that that end game will probably change. So to me, it's something you want to start regularly, right? And it starts with like what you said you did. Understand the fair market value of your business. Understand what the different options are, right? Like we've heard ESOPs floated in veterinary medicine. You can sell to a corporate under 4 or 5 different structures, right? You can have a joint venture. You can have 100% cash exit. You can get Topco, platform equity.
You can
You
be a
can
tuck
sell,
under, you can do all kinds of
you
stuff,
can do
right?
all different kinds of things, right? You can sell to an associate in an earnout process. Like there's a lot of different ways. Maybe it's family. Like I have some doctors now who want to look at family structures where, it's maybe a non-DVM and they've got a larger network of, but understanding what are those 8 different exit options. Then assessing your hospital and your personal place, right? What is the profit gap in your hospital? What's the best hospital like you operate at? And where do you operate? So then you can compare, okay, how close am I and how ready am I to sell? And what do I need to do to get to best in class? You need to understand the value gap, right? What is, if, what
And
is,
what are the risks, right? Like if you've got one DVM at your practice generating 60% of the revenue, and I'm going to come buy your practice and they're not going to buy it, that DVM leaves,
I'm done.
I'm
It's an
smoked.
unsellable asset.
Yeah.
Right? And then understanding the last thing is understanding your vision. And for all these small business owners, what's that wealth gap, right? And the wealth gap is how much are you worth today yourself outside of your business? And how much do you need to fund out of your business to obtain your retirement vision? And that changes over time, right? Because like if you sold today, Bill, that number
That's
is
why,
big.
yeah, if somebody wants to buy me today, it's the number I want to get when I'm 65, not the number, so you got to pay me what I'm worth when I'm 65 as I continue to build this over the next 15 years, not today's value, because I'm not retiring. If you give me money today, it needs to last the rest of my life, not from age 65 to death, age under 50 to death. And so, and that's why I was very interested in your answer to that question, because it's really, what does done look like? I did an acquisition inside the insurance world, as I mentioned, and it's figuring out what's important to the seller and what's important to the buyer. And those are going to be two different things. Obviously the buyer, they want to get return on their investment and make sure that the money that they're investing in the acquisition is going to be returned over the period of time. And then, because eventually, once the payout's done, as the buyer, obviously, well, that's when the owner gets a raise, or you get a raise. Like I'm gonna eat lean while I'm doing the acquisition, but then once the acquisition's done, I'm done paying it off. I'm gonna get to eat a little bit better. And for the seller, it's, well, I want my team taken care of, or I want my clients taken care of, or I'm going to rent the building, or all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, it really does boil down to, okay, well, what am I getting paid? Because I spent 35 years of my life, blood, sweat, tears, missed ball games, all the stress of all of it, especially in the vet world, with additional stress around the practice.
No, I mean, there's no doubt, right? And I think it's to your point, it's mentally and emotionally, what is it worth? Practically, what's the value worth? And then in today's environment, it's a lot of times it's reconciling those two pieces together. Because we'll talk with sellers who, well, when I bought my hospital, I paid 1 times revenue. So my hospital's worth 1 times revenue. Well, that's how hospitals were valued in 1983.
Like I said,
It's
yeah,
not
it's
how
insurance, right? 2.5 times premium, or 2.5 times revenue, whatever that is, whatever that number is.
yeah. And in the veterinary hospitals, it's what falls to the bottom line now creates value, not what comes in at the top. And so, having that information earlier so that you can be prepared and then you can outline, because the other issue is, you're trying to solve for retirement. You're weighing, like, what are my exit options? Do I want to sell maybe corporately? Do I want to sell for legacy? The sooner you outline what that is, you write out a path to get there, the more options there are. If you show up at 63 years old and say, hey, I'm out in 2 years, well, I mean, we're looking for an all cash buyer to solve for whatever your wealth gap, whatever value it is you need out of the hospital. If you start at 53, we can build a whole roadmap, and now you could have 5 different options available.
Well, from an acquisition standpoint, right? And I talked a little bit about that, where you have to build. If you want to sell internally, you've got to build the mechanism internally for somebody to be able to buy that. Because if I just come and say, my practice is worth, $6 million. Hey, associate working for me, I'm going to sell this to you in 18 months. Number one, did you pay them enough to qualify for a loan and jump through all the hoops? You have a lot of experience, 20 plus years experience lending money to practices for acquisitions and stuff. It's not just snap the fingers, get a $3 million loan anymore. It's, you're putting it all on the line, and how much is going to be seller finance where the veterinarian's holding the note, and how much is bank financed and SBA lending versus traditional, and all those things that come into play. If you didn't take time to prepare to have the cash available inside the practice for the associate or the person who's going to buy it internally, be able to use the revenue for the business to buy the business for them, you have to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, again, one of my favorite stories is a veterinarian who kind of started the process 10 years ahead of time. Probably ended up, because he started that process and made that commitment, may have exited a little bit early. But when he started the process, he was working a 6 day, 6 days a week, 65 plus hours, and managing the stress of a, 2.5 doctor, 3 doctor growing hospital. Had a couple of great associates, gave them a path to ownership over the next 10 years, where basically he gave them responsibilities. Now, he did something that veterinarians really don't like to do. It's called delegating. But, went down that road of delegating these management responsibilities. At the time he started the process, they were 3 doctors. Ultimately, when he exited, they were 6.5, 7-ish doctor hospital. They moved from a leased facility to a freestanding facility. The doctors bought it. Did he get absolute optimal value? I'm sure he could have gone out to the market and pushed a little bit harder and squeezed another $1 million out of it, right? And for some people, they stick their flag in the ground and look, I win by getting the biggest number. But if you want that flexibility, I don't think there's anything he couldn't do in his retirement that he wanted to achieve. And oh yeah, by the way, he got to continue to own 15% of the hospital and get a dividend out of it, right? So if you start early and you empower team members, you either flush out they want it or they don't. And if they don't want it, then when you have to create that exit, there's nothing that they can really be upset about.
You don't get 18 months before exit and go, hey, are you okay? You want to buy this now? I'm going to get out. And they go, I have no interest in doing any of that. I just want to be an associate. I love practicing medicine. I want nothing to do with ownership, management, HR. You've done a really good job at that, and I want nothing to do with it. But in that owner's mind, that veterinarian's been their exit strategy for the last 10 years, and they get to that exit part and they go, oh, that person doesn't want to buy it. Now what?
Well, and I've seen it play out, on both sides, right? Like in the smaller 2 doctor hospitals, The associate was always the exit strategy. The owner started to take their foot off the gas. And what was it? It's $1.5 million, $1.6 million revenue hospital. For the longest time, the owner was the million to $1.1 million producer, and the associate was the 400 to 500, right? And then the last 3 years, the associate's going to buy the hospital. Again, communication. Never communicates to the associate, but starts to take his foot off, or she starts to take their foot off the gas. And now all of a sudden, the associate's the $1.1 million producer. Super happy. They're making $200,000+ a year. No management, no headaches, no nothing. The owner is now the $400,000 producer. And they go to the associate and say, hey, I'm going to, it's the start of 2024. I'd like to be out by the end of 2024. Are you ready to start the process? Well, I'm not your buyer. Well, now all of a sudden, you have that revenue concentration problem. The new buyer can't fire the associate.
Yeah, because they're the rainmaker. They're making the money. Yep.
They're making the money. And so now all of a sudden, this doctor has a worthless hospital.
Yeah.
Right. Or you've got, the scenario where it's a really large hospital and they never have that conversation to start the mechanism in place. And then they go to the doctor and they say, hey, yeah, like, absolutely, I'll sell it to you. And let's say they're going to sell it for 5 times earnings that the bank would finance. I've got a, $6 million hospital that does $1 million of EBITDA, earnings. I'd like to sell it to you for $5 million. And the associate's eyes just get big because there's like no way I can run that. Well, if you would have started with them 3 or 4 years ago and demystified everything that happens in the back room,
absolutely,
a veterinary hospital with the right systems, the right team, and it's not a complex business. It is a cash in, cash out business. And I don't want to oversimplify a very complicated business.
Not. Correct.
Because it takes significant human skills and significant relationship skills to make that work. But strictly from the business things, I mean, we're not dealing with accounts receivable. We're not dealing with prepaids. We're not dealing with inventory. Yes, there's inventory, but we're not buying raw goods. Like, a lot of those business principles that you and I talked about aren't present in a veterinary hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I guess the end, thinking about, everything we just kind of chatted about the last 10 minutes, it's never too early. If you're a veterinarian looking or thinking at some point, so for all the owners out there or partners, you're not going to beat Father Time. And at some point you're going to say, I'm done. And the best day to plant an oak tree is today. And so, that it's the thinking about, okay, I'm at a certain level now. I'm 10, 5, 8, 15 years away from retirement or selling. What does that look like? And what are some things that I can do to start planning that? And, quite frankly, it's as simple as, because there's 2 conversations, right? If you're an employee anywhere, it's the mindset of doing my job and what my role is to accomplish the task in my role. If you're a veterinarian, it's practicing medicine. However, there's also the mindset of the entrepreneur or the business owner. And it's a different mindset and a different conversation about how you handle a specific situation with an employee, with a client, with a vendor, whatever that might look like. From the employee standpoint, this is the conversation, but from the owner standpoint, this is my mindset in approaching that decision and mentoring the team of, yeah, this is the decision why we're making it. And here's the mindset, file that away for if you're ever sitting in my chair. And so that way, if they ever do want to sit in your chair, you've trained them up so it's not brand new, fresh for them on the outset. But really, the best time to plant the oak trees today, right?
Absolutely. You can't start early enough.
So, talking about the management piece and transitioning a little bit to that to kind of wrap things up, what are some areas of hospital management that are frequently neglected? I mean, so, we're talking about that mentorship piece. Where do you see things that are frequently neglected in the veterinary management role?
Well, the business of veterinary medicine has changed so much over the years, right? Like, it used to be a business where you gave away your services and sold your products. And that's a fairly simple business, right? Because the product comes in, you know how much you have to mark it up to make a living. And, we have Chewy and PetMed Express, and we can be upset that somebody came and took our business, but welcome to entrepreneurship and business ownership, right? Everybody's always looking for inefficiencies to capitalize on. So where I feel, I mean, again, I think there's a lot of components of management. I think we could, you and I could spend probably hours talking about HR, and we could talk about, but from a simplistic standpoint, like I think we've almost tried to make fee schedule and our understanding of fee and profitability like too simple, right? Like if I just go step on fees, it'll all work out. Well, I mean, what happens? Are we accounting for the fact that we've just been through this period where to retain quality staff, we didn't raise staff wages 6%. We may have raised staff wages 25%. And our largest cost is staff wages. And our staff is spending time doing procedures. So I've been very intrigued, kind of been working in this project related to trying to break down fees where they're understandable, right? Where we're looking at what is the cost to deliver a service and applying some cost accounting principles to fees. Because to me, that is really the driver, a strong fee schedule that you create a regular process in reviewing is the foundation of how you can ensure that your business isn't just healthy in a short period of time, but that process is how you ensure that you maintain trust with your team. So your team doesn't feel like you're just profit driven. You maintain trust with your clients, which is huge, right? We can't erode the trust between veterinarians and their clients. It's one of the biggest concerns that I have in the veterinary space as we head forward is, can we maintain veterinary medicine as one of the most trusted professions in the country?
Especially, so I'm in an industry that is not trusted. I know what I sell, right? And if you look at everything out there in the marketplace, it's make it easy, save money. You just need to get this product and check the box. And I think there's some commoditization that's happening in the veterinary industry as well, where you look at telemedicine, different services for well visits being offered at different locations that aren't traditional veterinary practices, where it's just show up, get your vaccine and walk out, without naming any big major brands. But, we know the ones that are out there that are trying to dip their toe in this because they see how big the marketplace is. And that what happened with, Chewy and some of these other places coming in where you can come in and order all your dog food and everything. Now it's, well, I don't have to schedule an appointment with my vet. I can go grocery shopping, bring my dog in, get a vaccine and walk back out without having to go through all the rigmarole of scheduling an appointment at my vet practice because they're booked out 4 months.
Well, you tapped another thing that's huge to me that people need to focus on. Like, have you ever stayed at a hotel?
Yes, I have.
What do you stay at the Super 8?
No, I generally like to stay at a little bit better than I've stayed at Super 8s, Travis, but I generally don't like to stay at Super 8s.
So every time you book the Four Seasons?
No, I like to get the best value for my money.
So a lot of people are kind of bothered, but veterinary medicine in my mind is a service business, right?
Correct.
We're selling a service. That service is medical care to a client. And there's a reason. You just said you don't want to stay at the Super 8, but somehow, some way, the Super 8 is a massive brand. Or, I'll pick my favorite, because I always love Tom Bodett,
Motel 6
on it, Motel 6, right?
Absolutely.
But, that fills a need of a client base.
Correct. There's a segment of the market that's okay with the Super 8 and is happy to stay at the Super 8.
And when you think about veterinary medicine as a service business, we need to think about how we meet each different group of clients where they're at.
Sure.
And I think you're going to see that need to come out more and more in veterinary medicine it never used to matter because there wasn't the level of diagnostic tools available. There wasn't the cost to invest in those diagnostic tools. Some of the end of life care, some of the routine care even, right? Like wasn't always where it is. And the need to meet those clients that are looking for this level of service or that level of service and then build your business model around that is really, I think it's really a very needed skill set and something that each person who owns a hospital should think about, because it's very difficult to be everything to every client base.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed our time today, Travis. I think for our listeners out there, as we wrap up here, what's the one, if you were going to say anything to a veterinarian about exit planning or business planning for their practice, what's the one thing that you generally tell all practices at all of your meetings?
Thick skin. I think it's thick skin, right? Like you may hear some things you're doing great. If you sit down with an advisor or a guidance person and they tell you there's nothing wrong with your business and there's no area to improve, kindly get up, push the chair in, and walk away. Because, exit planning is about having somebody help us see where our blind spots are and then putting team members around you to improve those blind spots.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Doc Rivers: "Good players want to get by, great players want to be coached, and superstars want to be told the truth." And so, you want to be told the truth. Well, I really enjoyed our time today, Travis. For our listeners out there, where can they find you online, and how would they reach out to you and get a hold of you? And then name your podcast again for us. Just it'll be in the show notes for everyone, but just where can people find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got website, love to go visit it. It's just 3-in-1. And that's 3 spelled out and 1 vetadvisors.com. Email is the same, Travis at 3-in-1 vetadvisors. Certainly feel free. Anybody can give me a call. Phone number 678-523-0234. Happy to catch up and continue the conversation at a personal level with anybody.
And then you and I connected on LinkedIn as well. So you're there. And what's the podcast again for us?
Our podcast is Vet Worthwhile.
Vet Worthwhile podcast. Well, thanks so much for the time, Travis. I've really enjoyed connecting with you and collaborating on exit planning and management for veterinary practices. And thanks so much, and really enjoyed the time today.
Thanks a bunch, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Veterinary Blueprints. If you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions for an episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at bill@butlervetinsurance.com. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you could do me a huge favor, it helps with the algorithm. If you can like, share, or comment on the post, leave a review, I would love it. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.